Welcome back to Justice Reloaded HD. Before we dive into today's story, I want to ask you something, not to test your memory, but to stir your heart. Have you ever caught someone, not because you had to, but because something inside you whispered, "Don't let them fall"? Not a planned act. Not a grand gesture. Just a moment, a heartbeat, where instinct and compassion met halfway. Today's story begins with such a moment. A near fall. A small misstep that might have ended in fear or pain, but instead, it opened the door to something no one expected. You see, sometimes all it takes is a split-second decision from a stranger to change everything, for a child, for a parent, and even for the one who simply reached out without hesitation. If you believe in the power of kindness, if you've ever felt the warmth of being caught when you didn't even know you were falling, then this one's for you. Before we begin, don't forget to click like and subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD. We share real, heartfelt stories every week, stories that prove life's quietest moments are often its most powerful. Now take a breath, settle in, and let this story remind you that sometimes, the right person shows up not to save the day, but simply to say, "I'm here if you need me." The late afternoon sun cast a warm amber hue over the quiet streets of downtown Seattle. Just a few blocks from the bustling waterfront, tucked between a laundromat and a used bookstore, sat a modest but well-loved diner named Maple and Main. It wasn't trendy or sleek like the new cafes downtown, but it had something else: comfort, familiarity, and the kind of silence that let people breathe. The back of the diner opened to a small patio, enclosed with white-painted wooden fencing, where local kids often played when their parents lingered over coffee refills. At the edge of the patio was a single concrete step, shallow but worn, leading to the main dining area, hardly noticeable to most, but to a child with unsteady legs, it might as well have been a cliff. Inside, seated near the window, Jonathan Mercer stirred his coffee absent-mindedly. At 63, the once celebrated tech mogul had traded boardrooms for quiet breakfasts with his son. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed back, and his tailored coat hung neatly on the back of his chair. He had made his fortune building secure communication software, and while his name still occasionally surfaced in business magazines, Jonathan's world had dramatically narrowed in recent years, to a single focus: Owen. His 7-year-old son sat beside him, carefully sipping apple juice through a straw. Owen had large, watchful eyes and a way of clutching his paper napkin that spoke volumes about his anxiety. Born with congenital hypotonia, his muscles lacked the tone and strength other children took for granted. Each step was calculated, each motion deliberate. He had fallen once before, badly enough to break an arm, and since then stairs, curbs, even sidewalks became potential enemies. He didn't speak much, not because he didn't want to, but because fear lived close to the surface, curling around his words and thoughts like ivy around stone. And yet, for all his caution, Owen was curious. That day, he had spotted a red plastic ball rolling along the patio. It had bounced in from somewhere and now rested by the step, just beyond reach. He stared at it for a long moment, glanced at his father, who was lost in thought, and slowly slid off his seat. Near the kitchen, Clara Reese balanced a tray of water glasses on one hand, moving with a fluidity that came from years of fast-paced service. At 29, she was one of the younger servers, cheerful but quiet, with a calm that somehow steadied even the crankiest customers. She wore her dark brown curls in a low bun, and there was always a pencil tucked behind her ear, a habit she'd picked up back when she was a volunteer physical therapist for children's clinics during nursing school. Life had taken a detour since then. Financial setbacks had forced her out of school, and now she worked double shifts at Maple and Main while saving every penny to go back. Still, she never forgot what she'd learned. How some children didn't need loud cheerleading or complicated equipment, they just needed someone to walk beside them. Someone who wouldn't flinch if they fell. As Clara passed by the window, she spotted a flash of movement. A small boy teetered near the edge of the back step, knees locked, arms out slightly, not in play but in fear. She didn't know his name. She didn't know why her heart suddenly raced. All she knew was that in the half-second that followed, everything else in the world disappeared. Just moments after finishing his grilled cheese and apple juice, Owen had asked in his quiet voice if he could go look at the red ball outside. Jonathan nodded, distracted by a work email he hadn't meant to check, and the boy carefully slid off the booth seat. The back door to the patio creaked as Owen nudged it open, his tiny hands gripping the frame. The step was only 5 inches high, but for Owen, it was Everest. He paused, eyed it with the hesitation of someone who'd learned the hard way that even the smallest fall could bring pain. He lifted his foot, then the other, tried to steady himself, and that's when his left knee buckled. His arms flailed. The ball forgotten. Time seemed to slow. From across the patio, Clara had just exited the kitchen, balancing a tray full of iced water and lemon slices. She saw the boy's outline wobble at the edge of the step, saw the panic bloom across his face, and without thinking dropped the tray. The glasses shattered behind her. But she didn't stop. In 2 long strides, she dove forward, arms out. Just before Owen's head could hit the pavement, he landed, not on cold concrete, but in the soft safety of her arms. Everything went silent. Jonathan, now at the door, froze. He'd seen it all, the fall, the blur of Clara, the tray still rolling. But what struck him most wasn't her reflexes. It was Owen. The boy wasn't screaming. He wasn't crying. He was clinging to Clara's shirt, and breathing softly. As if, for the first time in a long while, he felt safe. The next morning, Clara was wiping down the diner counter when a man in a dark suit walked in, too sharply dressed for coffee and eggs. He looked around briefly before approaching her, holding out a small envelope with her name handwritten across it. "For Mr. Mercer," he said politely, then turned and left before she could ask a single question. Clara opened the envelope with hesitant fingers. Inside was a note, written in ink that wavered slightly, like the writer had paused more than once. "My son said, she knows how to catch without hurting. I'd like to invite you to our home. J.M." Her heart skipped. It wasn't a thank you. It wasn't even a formal offer. It was something else, quiet, unsure, but sincere. That evening, she stood at the gates of a house that looked more like a retreat than a residence. Tucked in the hills above Seattle, the Mercer estate was beautiful, but not cold. It was surrounded by trees, with wide windows that invited light instead of blocking it out. Jonathan met her at the door. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "He's been asking for you," he said simply, and led her inside. She expected a meeting. A thank you. Maybe a small discussion about safety. What she didn't expect was Owen, waiting by the hallway in socks, hands tucked into the sleeves of his hoodie, eyes brighter than the day before. When he saw her, he didn't run. He didn't smile wide. He just whispered, "If you're here, I can try." Try what? Clara didn't have to ask. Jonathan's eyes said it all. Owen had refused therapy for over a year, shutting down any attempt at exercises, terrified by the idea of falling again. But now, standing just a few feet from her, he took a small step. Wobbly, unsure. And then another. Clara dropped to one knee beside him, not guiding, not correcting, just being present. "I'm here," she said. Jonathan watched from the doorway, stunned. The boy who screamed at staircases, who cried at the idea of uneven ground, was now voluntarily moving. All because one waitress had caught him, gently. Clara didn't say yes to a job that day. No contracts were discussed. No salary was offered. She simply returned the next day. And the next. Each visit, Owen walked a little farther. Sometimes he fell. Clara never rushed to catch him unless he asked. Instead, she taught him how to land safely. How to laugh when his knees hit the mat. How to look at the floor not as danger, but as something he could stand up from. To her, it wasn't therapy. It wasn't even work. It was a promise, spoken without words, between her and a small boy who believed she would never let him fall alone. Clara never brought a clipboard. She didn't show up in scrubs or carry laminated charts. She didn't time Owen's steps or correct his posture with clinical detachment. Instead, she wore soft sneakers, a loose sweater, and a calmness that felt like safety wrapped in cotton. From the very beginning, she made one thing clear: she wasn't there to fix him. She was there to walk with him. The first few days, she said very little. She let Owen set the pace. They moved together, side by side, up and down the wide hallway outside his room. Clara didn't hold his hand unless he asked. She didn't brace him unless he reached for her. She stayed within arm's length, always watching, always ready, but never hovering. When Owen stumbled, which he often did, Clara didn't gasp or rush forward. She'd pause, crouch beside him, and say, "Let's try that again, but this time let's make the fall yours." She taught him how to fold into the floor gently, how to let his knees absorb the impact, how to roll a bit so he didn't land stiff. She even showed him how to catch himself with his palms if he felt himself tipping forward. It wasn't traditional therapy. It wasn't structured. But it worked. One morning, Jonathan watched from the kitchen as Owen approached the back patio step, the same step that once made him freeze. This time, the boy looked at it, then at Clara, then back again. He stepped forward. And then, he let himself fall. Not a hard fall. Just enough to test it. He hit the grass with a soft thud, looked around, then laughed. Jonathan nearly dropped his coffee. It became their rhythm. Walk. Fall. Laugh. Try again. Clara introduced little challenges, stepping over cushions, hopping between tiles, crawling backwards. She never called them exercises. They were just games. Little adventures disguised as lessons in balance, control, and trust. Owen began to move with a freedom he hadn't known before. His limbs, once cautious and stiff, now carried a lightness. He walked more. He explored the garden. He even asked if they could try the park one day. Jonathan couldn't believe the change. "What are you doing differently?" he asked Clara one afternoon. She smiled, wiping her hands on a napkin. "I'm not teaching him to walk straight. I'm teaching him it's okay to fall crooked." There was a silence between them then, not heavy but full. Jonathan realized what Clara had really given his son wasn't strength or mobility. It was permission. Permission to try. Permission to fail. Permission to get back up without shame. And somehow, that permission was exactly what Owen needed. Jonathan stood at the edge of the French doors, his hands tucked into the pockets of his cardigan, watching through the glass as Owen toddled across the yard with Clara a few steps behind him. The boy was chasing a plastic pinwheel that spun lazily in the breeze. He moved with purpose, still a bit unsteady, but unafraid. Clara didn't hover. She let him lead. And Jonathan, once the man who had child-proofed every corner of their world, found himself smiling. He used to obsess over safety. Every edge covered. Every floor padded. He'd installed railings in rooms that barely had steps, hired top pediatric therapists, and even redesigned Owen's bedroom so the boy could reach everything without climbing. And yet, despite all the precautions, fear had ruled their home. Not Owen's fear, his. But now, watching his son fall gently into the grass, burst into giggles, then scramble up with Clara's soft encouragement, Jonathan realized what had been missing all along. It wasn't more protection. It was courage. Later that evening, over dinner, a relative, well-meaning but blunt, leaned in and asked, "Why are you letting a waitress teach your son to fall?" Jonathan didn't flinch. He set down his fork, looked across the table, and said, "Because she's teaching him how to get back up without being afraid." There was a long pause. No one said anything after that. Because the truth was clear. Clara hadn't come with credentials or clinical plans. But she brought something no program had managed to give Owen: resilience. Not just the physical kind, but the emotional kind. And Jonathan, a man who once believed solutions came in the form of systems and strategies, now stood still, and watched his son rise again and again, braver each time. The video was less than 20 seconds long, grainy, and taken from a corner security camera outside the diner. It showed a small boy near the edge of a step, arms flailing. Then blurred motion, a young woman rushing in, catching him before his head hit the ground. The tray flew. The glasses shattered. But the boy landed safe. Whoever posted it had slowed the footage, added dramatic music, and captioned it with, "Billionaire dad lets disabled son fall while trusting a waitress." It spread like wildfire. Social media did what it always did, took a quiet, private moment and twisted it into something loud, controversial, and cruel. Within hours, news outlets were requesting statements. Opinion blogs ran with headlines like "Child in Danger?" "Mercer's unusual parenting choices raise eyebrows." Jonathan saw it that night. Alone in his study, phone buzzing with notifications, he clicked on the video and froze. It wasn't the footage that shocked him. It was the context, the implication, the public gaze. He imagined how it must look, a billionaire father casually letting a waitress train his fragile son in a backyard with no medical supervision. And then the worst thought crept in. Did Clara know this would go public? He remembered how kind she'd been, how natural. But also, how quickly things had changed once the video was out. Was she trying to become famous? Secure a deal? Ride the attention? Doubt can grow fast in silence. And Jonathan had spent years learning to trust no one. The next day, Clara arrived like always, toting her sneakers and a lunchbox Owen liked to share. But the gate didn't open. Jonathan stood on the front steps, hands folded, expression unreadable. "You won't be coming anymore," he said quietly. Clara blinked, caught off guard. "What? Why?" He held up his phone, screen facing her. It's everywhere." Her eyes scanned the clip. She'd seen it already. Friends had texted it to her in disbelief. "I didn't post that, Jonathan. I didn't even know there were cameras." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. But he didn't step aside either. "This has gone too far. My son's safety, our privacy, it's not up for public consumption." Clara took a breath, holding back the sting behind her eyes. "I caught your son. That's all I ever tried to do." "I know," he said, but it sounded like a lie he was trying to believe. Without another word, she turned and walked away. And in the quiet that followed, something inside that house changed. Owen didn't ask for Clara the next day, but he didn't smile either. He didn't reach for his sneakers. He didn't approach the back step. He just sat, quietly sketching. And Jonathan, despite his wealth, his staff, his endless resources, felt like he'd just dropped something far more valuable than he could ever replace. Clara didn't argue. She didn't call back or beg for a second chance. She knew the look in Jonathan's eyes, the kind of hurt that comes not just from betrayal, but from fear disguised as control. So she walked away, quietly, respectfully, leaving behind no confrontation. Only a folded piece of paper slipped through the gate. It wasn't long. Just one line, written in her steady, no-nonsense handwriting. "I'm not famous for catching anyone. I just want kids to know that if they fall, someone will be there to catch them." No signature. No blame. Just a truth she carried too deep to shout out loud. She hadn't saved Owen for attention. She hadn't stayed for recognition. She showed up because she knew what fear looked like in a child's eyes, and what peace looked like when they finally felt safe. And now, as she walked down the quiet street alone, Clara didn't regret a single step she had taken, only the one she was now forced to take away. It wasn't until the fourth day of silence that Jonathan finally asked his assistant to trace the origin of the video. The results came back quickly. It had been uploaded by a tourist from Iowa who had visited the diner that day with her niece. She'd posted it online, gushing about the waitress who moved like a superhero. Clara's name wasn't mentioned anywhere. She had nothing to do with the post. Jonathan stared at the email for a long time, the screen glowing cold in the dim light of his study. Meanwhile, Owen had retreated into himself. The boy who had once dared to fall with a laugh now wouldn't even stand. He refused his sneakers. He refused to eat at the table. Instead, he spent his afternoons on the floor of his bedroom with a box of crayons and silence thick as winter air. He didn't speak, not out of protest, but heartbreak. Jonathan stepped in one evening to check on him. Crayon wrappers were scattered everywhere, and dozens of sheets of paper lay around the room. Every drawing was almost identical: a small boy suspended mid-air, arms out, falling, and a woman with curly hair catching him just before the ground. Over and over. Jonathan bent down slowly, picking up one of the sketches. The look on Owen's face in the drawing was unmistakable. Not fear. Not even surprise. It was trust. "Owen," he said softly, kneeling beside him. "Can we talk?" The boy didn't respond. He just reached for another crayon. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he asked, "If I fall again, who's going to catch me?" Jonathan froze. There were 1,000 things he could have said. Empty reassurances. Promises made in desperation. But the truth sat in his throat like a stone. He didn't know how to answer. So instead, he stood up, walked out of the room, and picked up the phone. His fingers hovered over Clara's number for a moment. He hadn't spoken to her since he shut the gate in her face. Since he doubted her. Since he chose his fear over her heart. But now, none of that mattered. He pressed call. The line rang once. Twice. Then her voice, tentative, quiet. "Hello." He didn't start with an apology. Didn't try to explain away what he'd done. He just spoke the truth. "Owen needs you." There was a pause on the other end, long enough that Jonathan thought she might hang up. But then came her reply, soft and steady. "I know," she said. "I've been waiting for him to say it." Clara returned on a quiet Thursday afternoon. No cameras. No dramatic entrances. Just the familiar sound of her soft knock on the back door, like she never really left. Jonathan opened it himself this time, not with hesitation, but with something closer to hope. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. She simply smiled, and he stepped aside. Inside, Owen had been sitting by the window, sketchbook in his lap, crayons resting quietly in the folds of his blanket. But the moment he saw her, everything in him lit up. He dropped the crayons, slid off the couch, and without a word, ran toward the back door. Clara barely had time to react. He stopped at the same step where everything had begun, the one that used to paralyze him with fear. This time, he looked at her once, gave a little nod, and jumped. Just a small leap. But he landed steady. Safe. Proud. Clara didn't move. She didn't catch him. She didn't have to. Owen turned around, cheeks flushed with excitement, and grinned. "I knew you were there," he said. "That's why I didn't need to be scared." Her heart swelled. She knelt down, opened her arms, and he rushed into them, not because he needed saving, but because he knew he was already safe. Jonathan watched from a few steps away, his throat tight with emotion. This wasn't just recovery, it was transformation. Weeks later, the three of them stood in front of a small community center, ribbon in hand. A new initiative was being launched, the CatchMe Project. It wasn't about therapy in the traditional sense. No stiff routines. No pressure to meet milestones. It was about teaching children with physical challenges how to fall without fear, and more importantly, how to trust that someone would be there to help them rise. Clara was the heart of it. Jonathan funded it, structured it, helped find staff and space. But the soul of the project belonged to her. In every lesson, children were taught not just movement, but confidence. They were shown how to tumble gently, how to laugh through the stumbles, how to believe that one bad fall didn't mean the end of trying. Parents cried. Kids smiled. And Clara? She stayed steady, always a few steps behind, always ready, always present. At the opening ceremony, when reporters asked Jonathan what inspired the idea, He simply looked toward the corner of the room where Owen was playing on the mat. Clara sat nearby, watching but not hovering. Jonathan adjusted the mic, cleared his throat, and said, "A child once asked me who would catch him if he fell. I didn't have an answer then. Now I do." He glanced at Clara, then back at the crowd. We don't stop kids from falling. We teach them they're not falling alone. And in that moment, with lights overhead and applause rising, the story that began with a stumble ended in strength, and the kind of faith that only comes from knowing someone will always be there when you need them most. If you believe that sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to catch you at the right moment, then maybe fear doesn't have to win. Leave a like if this story touched your heart. And don't forget to subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD for more real, inspiring stories every week, because the smallest acts of kindness can change everything. Thank you for staying with us until the end. We'll see you in the next story.